Hi there, this is Carl Irwin with another music tutorial. You were probably expecting a Blender tutorial by now, and there is one coming very shortly, I promise, but I wanted to follow up on the most recent tutorial where we were looking at orchestration and development of a theme. This is again in the kind of pre-production phase when you're writing music for film, and I wanted to talk about a couple of other pre-production concepts while we're at it before we move on further into more advanced things dealing with timing and time code. And I wanted to talk briefly about sound design and import some of this discussion into the work we've already done on our orchestration. So very quickly, when I say sound design, I'm referring to the creation of new sounds. These would be more in the area of electronic sounds or new acoustic sounding sorts of sounds that are put together from various samples. They are engineered to sound unique and sound a certain way. And this is a very important part of writing film music in today's field of film scoring because many current contemporary film scores depend on a lot of sound design, not merely just using instruments that already exist or even electronic instrumentation that is pre-existing, but the creation and generation of new and unique sounds. I also want to talk briefly about the value of incorporating these kinds of engineered sounds into even your virtual orchestra mixes, simply and quite frankly even into real orchestra mixes. That's when you have a real orchestra sitting and recording. It can be very beneficial to incorporate electronic augmentation into these mixes because, particularly with virtual orchestras, it can make the virtual orchestra sound more realistic when it is juxtaposed to sounds that are intentionally and clearly synthetic and electronic. It can just help to make those other samples sound all the more real when you have that juxtaposition. So this can be a good thing for a number of reasons, and those are just a few of them. I wanted to talk about how we can create a few sounds and do a little bit of sound design. We'll talk a little bit about how to make some sounds that are acoustic sounding, and we can talk a little bit about making things that sound very overtly electronic as well. And then we'll look briefly at mixing some of these ideas into the mix that we already have and see how that plays out and how much it can, how much better it can make it, how we can +1 our mix as it is. So with that in mind, I wanted to address a couple of other things before we get into it. A few of you have been asking about the creation of sound fonts and sampling sounds, my own sounds, and making my own sound fonts. I've actually done that. A number of the percussion sound fonts that you'll find in that package that I shared with you a few tutorials back, and it's still available for download if you go look for that. Really big sound font collection. Some of those percussion sounds were sampled by me. Of course, those are very easy to sample. Percussion sounds make one clear sound and you don't have to loop them. So I have done that. I've also sampled wind instruments as well. I'm a trumpet player. I play a variety of instruments because I am a instrumental music teacher, but trumpet is my main instrument. That's if I was going to play professionally in a professional setting, that would be the instrument that I play. It's my primary instrument. I have sampled a trumpet before. I can't remember, but I think that one of the samples in that pack is a sample that I made years ago when I was just out of college. One of the solo trumpets that's in there you'll hear is actually my sounds. And I'll tell you one thing that I found. There are limitations in the sound font format related to bit rate that you really can't get around. The sound font 2, there's I believe a sound font version 3. Not many applications run on it, but the bigger one, the older one, believe is 16-bit. and it doesn't really get any better than that. So you're stuck with that. Now you can get around that with a number of filters and adding a number of effects on your mix that help to augment that sound, make it sound a little bit more, give it a little bit more depth to it. But you do have that limitation. The second thing that I can tell you from sampling is that making really great library of samples of an instrument requires a lot of samples. You need to not only sample the instrument, but you need to sample the instrument at multiple velocities, and then you need to sample the instrument again at multiple velocities in different articulations. And then you need to mix those articulations and sound samples together in such a way that it is coherent as a sound font. And you probably need to make multiple sound fonts, which is one of the things that we've been talking about when you are mixing together your sounds. You want to use various samples and articulations to get the most realistic outcome. So just taking one instrument, sampling one instrument and making it realistic means that you probably will end up with 4 or 5 sound fonts, each with, in the case of a trumpet, you would probably have 4 or 5 velocity layers. That's 4 or 5 instances of samples for whatever key set that you're sampling. And you would want to have a sample probably for every 3 or 4 keys. 3 or 4 note values before it starts to distort in such a way that it becomes unusable. That's a lot of recording, and that's a lot of work, and the payoff isn't really all that great when you consider the free sound fonts that are available. In the end, because of that bit rate limitation that you have, you find that it sounds just as good as all the other ones that you can find out there. Most people will download a sound font, a freebie, one of these open source ones, and they will criticize it. Well, it sounds okay, but only in very, very specific and limited use. Well, that's all sound fonts. That's the way it is. The key is to have a big library of multiple articulations that you can then mix together, and you can't get around that. There's no way to get around that. You have to create that library in order to have a great sound font and have a great sample. When you consider the big libraries that are not sound font, they are wave file, lossless wave file samples, that's how they work. There's multiple mic positions, multiple sample recordings at multiple mic positions, at multiple velocities, at multiple articulations, and then a network of key switching that allows you to move between them, all within an interface that makes it user-friendly. And even though it's user-friendly, it takes a lot of ingenuity on the part of the user to make it really sound real. You can't get around that. There's just no way to get away from that. There is no such thing as an expensive instrument that sounds great out of the box just by plugging it onto a MIDI sequence. You have to go through the work of applying articulations and making some choices, creative artistic choices that are informed. So I just wanted to address that. It's not really worth it, I guess is what I'm telling you. The free sound fonts that you have available out there, that the vast array of them, really can get you pretty close to where you want to be. It's just about spending time on it. And you'll hear, even when we go back and visit this mix that we worked on before, it sounds better now after I've put a little bit more time into it. With the addition of other sounds, plus I went back and I tweaked a number of those articulations. You can see the improvement as we go along, and if I spend even more time on it, it'll sound even better. It really comes down to the time. How much time are you going to put into it, and how much time do you have to put into it to make it sound really as perfect as you can get it. Okay, anyway, that is sound fonts. Now, about creating sound fonts and editing them, there's a few pieces of software that I can recommend. If you're on Linux, Swami is probably the best one. It has a very good graphic user interface. I will tell you, though, that I haven't used Swami in a while, and I found that the latest upgrade that I did on my Ubuntu Studio, my XFCE Ubuntu, made Swami unworkable. It crashes when it opens. It doesn't even open. So there's something going on with that. I don't know if they're really updating the Swami project at all or not, but it probably will run on the 16.04 long-term service installation, but I know that as of the 17.10 it's not running anymore, so I haven't used that one. Another great one I'll point out is Vienna, Viena. This is running in Wine. This is actually a Windows application. I haven't even opened it up here. This is actually a Windows application that can run in compatibility layer on Linux installations, and it is spectacular. It looks a lot like the original Vienna that was made by Creative Instruments. It's probably why it's called that. The original one's Viena, and then this one is Viena. Really, really great user interface, pretty typical to those early types of sound font editors that you can find. And we won't get into it, but this is what it looks like right here. There's a little bit of graphic user interface, and then there's ways to enter data based on just values 0 through 127. So that's Vienna. We'll close that out. Related to that, this is not a sound font editor, but related to that is the SynthFont project created by the same individual that created Vienna. SynthFont, I'll point this out, is also a Windows application that runs in Wine very well. There's two versions of it. There's an older version that is still essentially free. You're supposed to, give a donation or whatever, but there's this one, and then there's also a freemium version. I think will run for a little while, and then they ask you to pay a little bit to keep using it, and I think the functionality will stop. The old one is awesome. It is ugly as all get out. It's really not the most pleasant looking thing. It's got a very Windows XP, Windows 95, 98 kind of vibe to it. But it has a piano roll in which you can see all of the events happening all at one time. Has unlimited tracks. And it also has VST capability where you can use sound fonts, or you can use VSTIs, and you can use VST effects as well. So long as they will run in the Windows compatibility layer, they will run on Linux. If you're running on Windows, you can really use anything. This is just a really powerful MIDI sequencer. You can do everything on this, even though it doesn't look very nice. You can't do audio. Samples, at least I don't believe you can. It's really dedicated just to MIDI. It will play and write to WAV files as well. Just really powerful. It even gives you a MIDI events log where you can change things more in code and change controllers and change events at various times. So very powerful synth font. I would highly recommend it if you're on Windows, or if you really just want something that looks like a more traditional sound font suite, a MIDI suite, MIDI editor. Really powerful. And you can see everything happening all at one time, which is really great. It gives you even velocity and controller editing capability too down here. So SynthFont and Vienna, they go together. And then the more recent one is Polyphone. This is a sound font editor. I have not played with it yet. I'm going to get into this and maybe give you some tutorials. Really, if you've seen one sound font editor, you've seen them all, and this is just the latest one. Seems to be very stable. And I'm excited to try to use this. At first glance, it didn't seem to have any graphic user interface, but it actually does have an extensive graphic user interface, very easy ways that you can edit your sound fonts and generate new ones and set key velocity and key assignment in the graphic user interface. So we will get into that at some point and talk about editing and creating sound fonts, but not right now. So let's get into the topic of the day. I want to go to a new project here in LMMS. Because we've been working out of this, of course you can apply these principles to any MIDI editor. We're going to create a new instrument. And I'm actually going to create a new instrument using sound fonts from a very well-known sound font we've already talked about, the Fluid R3 General MIDI sound font. And I just want to show you how many layers this sound font has and how versatile it can be. It's got a lot of sounds in it that you just don't really use, and it's probably a shame. There's a lot of things you can use and find uses for. So we're going to make a sound that has a little bit of an electronic sort of vibe to it, but it sounds acoustic. It sounds like something in real space. We're going to make kind of a keyboard instrument, and then we're going to show you how we can use this instrument in your virtual orchestra mix to help to augment the sound of it and give it a little bit more flavor and texture. So let's start with this one here, and I have let's sign a MIDI keyboard to it real quick so we can hear it easily. And I have this one. Okay, we're in business, so I have this hooked up to a MIDI keyboard, my Clavinova. Now there's no effects on it right now, so let's add some effects so it sounds like it's in real space. We'll add an effects channel. Now we can add effects right to the sound font, but we're going to try to mix everything down to at least one final effect. And we'll add on this effects channel a reverb, and actually I like to use the free verb for an initial reverb effect, and we'll turn up the wet, turn back the dry a little bit, and we will turn the dampening all the way up. There, now it sounds like it's in space. Yeah, we'll go with that. That's fine. Okay, so that's the generic Yamaha grand piano. Now, I don't think this has very many velocity settings. In fact, I think it's only one. It's got some nice sounds, but it's only one velocity setting, so it's very limited in that respect. Let's see if we can change this a little bit. Let's add an effect to it. We're going to add an EQ, and we want to take out, I like to use the 4-band EQ, just deal in large chunks. So we have a high, couple of mids, high mid, and then low, and I just work with the gain. Let's take back the high gain a little bit. We'll soften the sound. So this is what it is with. This is what it is without. With. Okay, so you can see how much softer that sounds. Yeah, let's stick with that. That's fine for right now. Let's add another sound. And the way we'll do this, let's name this very quickly keys 1. And then we will just duplicate it, clone it. And we'll call this keys 2, and on this sound we'll pick another sound. Let's go to I like to do this. We'll take the vibraphone, and so we're hearing both sounds together. We're building this up. Let's go to the vibraphone sound, and we're going to remove the EQ that we had on there, and we're going to add another free verb. On this one, we're going to turn the wet level all the way up, the dry level all the way down. We're going to leave the dampening all the way on, turn the width all the way up, and the room size all the way up. And you'll see how horrible this sounds. Okay, so that adds quite a fascinating sort of fall off to it. Now what we're going to do on this is we're going to take the volume and turn it way back. Turn up a little bit more. And you can see how we're already augmenting this initial piano tone. So that's keys 2. Let's duplicate that first one again. Move it down. We'll call this keys 3. Let's put something else on there. We'll put on it, let's see, how about a Celeste. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not going to change anything about that. I like that. I think I'm going to turn back my vibraphone sound a little bit. Nice. Okay, let's add another one. We'll duplicate this again. Move it down. I want to hear more of the mechanics. I want it to sound like something is clicking in there, like we're really up close and personal on this instrument. So on this one, we're going to call this keys 4. I'm going to do something very unorthodox. We're going to go way down here, and I'm going to grab a taiko drum. So this would be like the big Japanese drum that you see, really large drum, and you see several of them kind of stacked up, played in you know, large epic Japanese type music, and you can hear that sound going on in the background. Let's add some effects to this, make it the way we want it. So let's open up our EQ that we already have. We're going to turn the highs all the way down and the lows all the way down. We're going to bump up the low mids so we get more of a click, kind of the sound of a hammer hitting. And then we're going to turn this way back. You can kind of hear what that sounds like. It sounds like the mechanism inside. We're inventing parts and pieces to this instrument that doesn't exist. Yeah, I like that. Maybe we'll turn that up a little bit more. And let's give it a really an electronic vibe to it. We'll make one more here. Move this down. We'll call this keys 5. And on this one, we're going to go to another layer. You can see the bank layers that this General MIDI sound font has. So the first bank has a lot of typical General MIDI instruments that you would find in a lot of different General MIDI sound fonts, and they would all be kind of in the same place. If we go down to bank number 8, though, we see some electronic sounds that are kind of hidden in there. You don't see this in MuseScore. These are kind of hidden in the background. A lot of really interesting sounds in there to play around with. I want to use this one here, the guitar feedback, which is actually more of a sound effect. We'll grab that. You see how that cuts off? I don't think I'm going to change anything about it. Love it. Okay, so we'll put that on there, and all of this stacked up makes a pretty interesting kind of instrument. And it's all plugged into this one effects chain, so you could kind of keep this grouped together in your project. And if I have the MIDI input enabled on all of them, so I can actually play this as an instrument if I want to. If I don't want to do that and I don't want to hear this instrument, probably the best way to turn it off is at the effects channel. Okay, so I could, for the purposes of organization, I could name this keyboard instrument, and now I have my instrument set up in the effects channel that I can isolate it from everything else. So that's sound design. You know, and you can make things as weird or interesting as you want to, but this is a unique sound that doesn't exist anywhere. We made it using samples available to us. One idea, if you're really into sound fonts, is you can do this and then you can sample the sound out again. So you would sample specific keys at a couple of different velocities, if there are different velocities. In this case, I don't think there's any. I think there's only one. So you would sample different keys at different places, and then probably let it play through to a particular end, because we have that we do have that feedback on there. You really can't capture that in a sample, so you'd have to kind of make a decision at where the loop would end. But you could sample that out and then use those samples in another sound font. You could create a whole new sound font from that, or just sample one key and use it in a hardware sampler, or use it in the sampler in your digital audio workstation, which LMMS has a sampler. That's probably something we'll look at sometime in the future. Anyway, that's the creation of a new instrument. Let's talk about something else here. This is something that I have done before, and not too long ago I saw somebody else do it, so I knew that I was onto something, and I wasn't terribly original in my idea. That it's a tactic that's been used before. It's a way to create electronic kind of rhythmic patterns very quickly without having to think too hard about the sound design, without having to think about creating new different sounds and then organizing them and then writing music on top of it. And this is how it works. Let me just open up a new project here. Empty. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put, in fact, this is really off the cuff. I haven't done it in this way. We'll just see if it works. I'm going to add a beat baseline, and then on the beat baseline, maybe the best way, I haven't done it this way. I was using sound fonts before, but LMMS actually has a whole bunch of really, really great sound samples, particularly for percussion. So why don't we use those? I'm going to find my drum sounds down here. And these are kind of loud. I apologize for the loudness. Let's take some of these. Take a couple of toms. That's a good sound. Just bear with me for a moment while I grab a few of these. It's a good one too, and we'll do that one. Okay, so we have a few sounds in over here. We're going to make a pattern. Let's add some steps. So we just doubled it. We have two measures now of music to work with. Let's just make something quick and dirty and ugly. Before we do that, actually, I want to assign an effects channel. This is very important. We're going to add 3 effects channels. The first one we're going to call vocoder. You can see where we're going to go with this. Instruments. In fact, let's abbreviate that so we can see a bit better. Vocoder instruments. The second one we're going to call vocoder carrier. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. The third one we're going to call vocoder. Okay, so vocoder very quickly is actually a piece of hardware originally that you could it was meant for using voice, speaking into, and then you could translate what you're speaking or singing into a keyboard instrument that would then play tones and pitches, but use your voice inflection and articulation and apply it to those pitches. So we're going to do something like that. There is a vocoder in LMMS. I've seen people refer to the vocoder in LMMS as not being very good. Let's just put it that way. They're wrong, by the way. The vocoder in LMMS is actually very good. The key is that it's quite simple, and if you want to augment it, what you need to do is apply additional filters and effects, and that's it. You just have to work a little bit harder at getting the sound that you want. But the vocoder in LMMS is actually quite useful, quite stellar. We'll look at how to use it here in a moment. So I want all of these samples to go to effects channel 1, which is the instrument set, and I also want the pan to be all the way to the left. This is very important the way the vocoder works. So the pan is all the way to the left, and all of the effects need to go to effects channel 1. Pan to the left, effects channel 1. Pan to the left, effects channel 1. Pan to the left, effects channel 1. Okay, so next thing I want to do is I want to create a beat pattern over here. I'm going to turn the volume back on these because they're pretty loud. So without getting into the piano roll, we're just going to use the beat step editor here. And let's see, kick on beat 1, 3, 1, and 3. And what does this sound like? Okay, something like that. Let's put this wood block, or wood sound, whatever that means, put it here on the ands. I don't know what this is going to sound like. We're really taking a shot. We got a lot of doubling there. Let's see what that does. This is going to sound totally different in the end, so don't worry about if it sounds corny or hokey. Let's put this on beat 2, 4, 4E, something like that. Tom. Let's make something kind of unique up here. Skip every 2/16. All the way through. Let's see what we get. Got kind of a jungle beat thing going on there, and then the claps down here. I don't know, this sounds pretty hokey. Let's hear. I'm going to turn this way down. I don't like the sound very much, but we'll use it anyway because we don't want to go back. So obviously you would compose with a little bit more discretion. Okay, now all of this is coming out of the left channel, and don't worry about that. We're going to get a wide span of sound here when we're done with it. So that's the beat bass line we're going to create for better or worse. That's interesting. All right, let's go to the other channel, the vocoder carrier. We're going to need to put something on that. You want to have a really gritty wave file. A wave, not file, a wave sound. So a synthesizer wave. You can make one straight up from the triple oscillator. There's a really good triple oscillator sound. Let's see if I can find it in here. That's the one. We're going to throw that into our project here, and we want to assign this to effects channel 2. This is where we're going to play kind of our music bass line. And then the last thing that we want to do is we're going to go to the vocoder channel down here. We're going to add an effect, vocoder. This is the onboard vocoder. And we're not going to do anything to it. We're just going to leave everything at the default, but there's actually quite a few controls on there that you can use to change and edit the sound that you have. We're just going to leave it the way it is just to kind of prove the concept here. Now the carrier also needs to go pan all the way to the right. So you have all of your instruments on the vocoder instrument channel all the way to the left, and the carrier is all the way to the right. Now the reason why it's called a carrier is because it's going to be the waveform that carries the instrument track. Okay, so this would be the kind of the keyboard sounds on a hardware vocoder that would carry the voice, which would be the instrument input. It would be the voice. So the voice is going to be plugged through the carrier, and then the carrier is going to carry those inflections out to the final output, the output from the vocoder itself. Now we need to do a little bit of assignment here in terms of channels. So the way this works, the ascend selection down here, when you select a channel you can tell it where you want that channel to send to. By default, all channels send to the master. We want the vocoder to send to the master, but for the instrument input, we do not want that to send to the master. We want it to send to the vocoder channel. And then the same for the carrier. We want this to not send to the master, but send to the vocoder channel. So the instruments and the carrier will send to the vocoder. The instruments on the left channel, the vocoder carrier on the right, and then the vocoder is going to send to the master, if that makes sense. Okay, so we have everything assigned properly. Now, if I input my beat baseline here on a couple of instances here in my song and I play it back, we won't hear anything. You can see that the instruments are playing, but it's not being carried by the waveform through the vocoder. So we need to add a waveform to that. So let's go in here and we're going to write some music, just a bass line. And in order to hear it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my effects to 0. And for sanity's sake, we'll set our pan back to the center so we can hear what's going on. So this is coming out the master. Sorry for killing your ears there. Let's turn that down a little bit just for the moment. And let's write a quick line here. Let's go to A. And we'll just do measures, full measures. So this is what we have in music. And we'll just control and copy that over. Okay, so let's go back here and set our effects channels properly. We want this to be on the carrier, channel 2. We want the pan to be all the way to the left, and we'll turn that volume back up again. And let's see what happens. And we get nothing. Okay, let's go back to the vocoder here and make sure things are working right. Oh, I think I know why. I'm sorry. Stupid mistake. This pan is on the wrong side. Okay, yeah, so this is why it matters. The vocoder translates your two channels left and right into your two signals. Okay, yeah, it should work. That's what we call pretty cool. Okay, so that's how that works. Now, if we go to the vocoder, we can change this further if we want to. Let's just say we quickly just add an EQ. And again, I like 4-band, deal in large chunks. Let's turn down the highs. We'll turn up the mids here a little bit. Let's see how that changes it. So you can see what we can come up with. So you could do a high-pass, low-pass filter sweep on it or something like that and do all kinds of interesting things with this. You can also play around with the vocoder settings and see where that gets you. Again, the controls that you have here are not that plenty. You need to add. This is how LMMS works. You need to add up additional effects in your effects channels, and that's where you go. It's modular. You know, this is a big modular synthesizer in a sense that you're adding effects and filters to get what you want. So anyway, that is a secondary idea. You can use a vocoder and percussion effects to generate some fairly slick percussive synthesizer beats. And let's see what this looks like when we apply it all to our project as we've had it. So let's go back here. We're going to open up our theme. We don't need to save that. Now on this project, I didn't use the samples from LMMS. I actually used a sound font of World Percussion Instruments, which I think sounds pretty good. I did change a little bit of the orchestration here, but what I did is the opening is now a new instrument, a keyboard instrument, very similar to what we were looking at a moment ago, is going to be playing that introduction instead of the harp, so underneath the oboe. I also added a moment here where we have a vocoder percussion groove going on. I have a couple of percussion kits playing into a vocoder carrier over here on the third instance of our theme where we have our modulation. And then I also added a couple of other synthesizer sounds. So I have a space, it's called Space Choir 2. Just a couple of individual drone notes going on here at very important times with a little bit of a volume automation on there to cut it off at the right moment. And then I also added that guitar feedback sound down here at a couple of places just individually. And I piped these through some different channels. So in doing this, I needed to remove my effects from my master. So the master out only has a compressor. And then I created an ensemble mix channel, and all of my virtual orchestra effects or channels mix down to my ensemble mix, and then that goes out to my master. And then in addition to that, coming to my master is my electronic sounds. So I have my vocoder mixing down to my master, and then an electronics channel that has some of these other electronic effects mixing down to that as well. So LMMS has a very robust effects mixer that allows you to send across channels and then mix down to other sub-channels and then out to your master. And that's what we're doing here. So we have this set up properly, I think, and let's hear what it sounds like. Let me move this to the relevant areas as it plays back, and you'll see how this sounds now with some electronic augmentation. Okay, so you can hear those elements then added to it to augment that sound, some electronic sound design going into it with a keyboard instrument down here, some of these feedback effects and the synthesizer drones, this vocoder patch going in there as well. One thing I neglected to mention before I started, I added some choir, and this is using the sound font set that I made, compiled together. It's part of the sound fonts that I shared with you. If you want to go download them, is a choir that has some consonant articulation. And the way this works is that you create some MIDI data, just a part, and this is just the chords from our original idea, and then I separate them out into words, and these are nonsense words, but I have a ta, a ka, a ma, and a shu kind of sound. So there's shu, ma, ka, ta, and then I augment those a little bit further by putting just an ah sound or an oo sound underneath it to just give it a little bit more of a vowel quality. In fact, I can solo these very quickly. You can hear what they sound like. They have their own channel. I probably could have just soloed that, but let's see what we get. Then it shows up again at the end. And again, it's nonsense. So to hear it, by itself, it sounds less real, of course. It sounds a little bit better mixed in. And you can't really make out that they're saying anything in particular. It's just a nonsense language, just some syllables. So, that's adds a nice little effect to get some vocal sounds in there. And it makes it more epic. So those are the things that I've changed about it. And I think I'm going to call this good. Again, for now, I don't think I'm going to do much more with this particular part of the music. We'll be focusing more on other elements of the score that have to do a little bit more with timing and hits. But I wanted to show you that you can do a lot of extensive sound design. You really can make any sound you want just by mixing and matching samples that you already have in a clever way, and then crossing the MIDI data to have it actuate all together. LMMS does do a MIDI through, and what that means is that you could have one instrument as the MIDI output go to other instruments that are in your list, so that you only have to put the MIDI data in one instrument. I have found, however, that at least in this release so far, that crashes almost every time when you do it. It'll work for a little while and then it crashes. So it's probably a little bit more reliable at this point to just copy and paste your MIDI data across your channels like we did down here to make it work. One other little trick here I'll just point out is that if you look down here at keys 3, this is the guitar feedback part of this keyboard. What I did is I took the MIDI data, so this should be starting on measure 2 right here. This is from one of the other tracks. But if you look at the feedback one, it starts a 16th note early, actually a whole beat early, and that gives an interesting effect. If I solo this real quick. So you have the feedback leading into the notes before they actuate, and I thought that sounded pretty neat. So I tried that and I liked it, and you can think in that way in part of your sound design to make instruments do really interesting things by offsetting some of the sounds a little bit. So anyway, that's where we're at. I just wanted to share those few things with you, and another what turned out to be somewhat of a lengthy tutorial, but I think a very essential one, that something you can do in pre-production is that you can be coming up with sound design. You can be creating unique sounds just for the particular production that you're working on, and sample those sounds and save them, or save projects aside for future projects, and kind of expand your library in that way. So I hope you learned something here, and I hope that this helps you with some of your projects, and I wish you all the best and happy mixing.